Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! You all know I love Megami Tensei games, and I love indie games. So I'm once again back and excited to discuss more indie games from talented creators who were inspired by MegaTen to build something special that they're passionate about. For those of you that are new to these, allow me to quickly explain that the main rule for a Megami Tensei inspired indie game is that I have to have some sort of verifiable statement from someone officially involved with the game saying that MegaTen influenced the title. This can be a tweet saying they based it off of SMT, or a Steam page description saying Persona was an inspiration, or a YouTube short saying how their game wouldn't exist if not for the unique ideas of Last Bible. Haven't seen that last one yet. In other words, I look for actual receipts, and I need something a bit more substantial than a dude with an anime profile pic saying that a game gives them Persona vibes. And I'm back with 5 more titles that fit the bill that you may want to check out if you're a fan of Atlus's beloved franchise. Before I get started, if you like what I do, please consider commenting, subscribing, or checking out the Patreon. It honestly all helps a lot. Alright, enough messing around, let's get to the games. And I figured we may as well start with a game that I'd only heard about for the first time a few months ago, but some of you may recall that Keylocker turn-based cyberpunk action managed to be my number 2 most anticipated title from the summer showcase. There are some games that I see and immediately get MegaTen vibes from them, even if I can't find any official source stating as such. Now, this doesn't mean I'm going to break the one main rule I have for this series, it just means that I took the chance to reach out to the developer, Munana, to simply ask if there was any intentional MegaTen inspiration, to which she replied, yes, the game is inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. I'm a huge fan, so you'll see design details that are inspired here or there just because I played the SMT games so much. End quote. In Keylocker, you play as Bobo, a doppelganger living in a cyberpunk society on Saturn who is capable of creating music, which has been outlawed by the satellites because it can generate electricity, which they covet and withhold from the masses, creating a classist society. You actually start the game by breaking out of jail for your crimes and finding a jukebot named Rocket, who is, without hyperbole, the bestest and most wonderful little robot in the whole wide world. I would not kill or die for Rocket, because that would make them sad. I will, however, remember to drink water and take frequent breaks from editing this video for Rocket, because Rocket wants what is best for all of us. Throughout the game, you'll encounter other characters like Bobo's brother Dealer and his girlfriend Ivy, who is his girlfriend. They are dating, and he is her boyfriend, because Dealer and Ivy are dating, and Dealer loves Ivy, who is his girlfriend. It's very subtle, but I was able to deduce that they are indeed boyfriend and girlfriend who are dating, thanks to the game reminding you of that nearly every single time they talk to or about each other. Bobo also recruits a few other characters to her band, and it's always kind of exciting to see who you're gonna run into next, because you're never really sure. While Bobo, Rocket, and Dealer are our only main party members, you will occasionally get help from guest characters who are in the area, like these weird thumb-limbed garbage bag things. I have no idea what they are, but I love them. As a huge fan of both prog rock and techno music, the world and aesthetics of Keylocker really appeals to me. Like, you know those old Roger Dean album covers where you're just on some desert planet with a castle in the background, and there's like 3 moons, but there's also just a bald eagle for some reason? This is like a game that basically takes place on one of those worlds, but presented through gorgeous, colorful pixel art. You never know what you're going to run into next on this planet, and that's half the excitement. There are humanoid walruses, a T-Rex that reminds you to save your game, and just perfectly normal alpacas. They smell like fart. Don't care, would still pet. Whether you're escaping the slums of a cyberpunk city, or riding a magic carpet through the desert, or making bizarre and dangerous deals with genies, the game feels like a grand rock opera, and it's easy to get invested in wanting to use the power of music and rhythm-centric turn-based combat to take down the satellites who have built themselves up like Greek gods. Speaking of the combat, it's a very distinct blend of challenging but forgiving. The reaction window on some of these timed hits is so precise that I ended up whiffing a lot of attacks. Unlike something like Paper Mario though, Keylocker is much less forgiving with these missed inputs. Since successfully blocking a move nullifies all damage, you basically have to do it in order to avoid getting wiped out in just 2 or 3 hits. You can maybe bounce back from a few misses here and there, but there are times when it feels like the game demands perfection from you. but I don't really hate it for that, because few things feel more satisfying than pulling off a successful string of perfect hits and blocks back to back. And if you do end up eating it, the game allows you to retry battles on the spot, so like I said, it's pretty forgiving. Keylocker understands that there's a learning curve to these precise inputs, and it gives you a pretty good opportunity to practice with them. You can actually choose different classes for Bobo and the other characters that can determine if you're more offensive or defensive in combat, and the game boasts that your class actually changes the story, but I'm not sure how much it actually does outside of a few characters reacting differently to which class you are or aren't. At the end of most of the game's chapters, Bobo and her band perform in these Guitar Hero-esque rhythm sections, and I sucked at these. I'm already really bad at rhythm games, but they also use the Pro Controller's shoulder buttons, and my brain just could not remember which button correlated to which note. Keylocker definitely isn't a game for everyone. The world is incredibly bizarre, the combat asks a lot from you, and I know the dialogue won't be everybody's cup of tea, but I frankly enjoyed it for the most part. Some of the humor is a bit hit or miss for me, but I still enjoyed it more than the comedy found in a few other games I've played in these types of videos. Between Keylocker coming out in September and this video going up, Munana has already announced their next big title, Clowned King, which is Fire Emblem, but with clowns. While the Steam page for this latest project doesn't directly mention MegaTen, the brief section at the end that talks about the developer states, Munana is a small indie game developer with a love for unique JRPGs and RPGs, such as the Devil Survivor Saga, Disgaea, Earthbound, the Shin Megami Tensei series, the Mario RPGs, and Off. So, I'll leave it up to y'all if you think that counts and I should revisit Clowned King on this show once it's out. I'm definitely gonna play it anyway, because it's Fire Emblem. With clowns. Alright, so this next game is actually going to serve as a little bit of a palate cleanser. This is a very short and simple game jam title that I found that was made by two brothers and originally put out in 2017. However, it was re-released onto itch.io about a year ago. And the name of this game is True Meteor Reincarnation. Yes, otherwise known as Shin Meteor Tensei. Although I guess if they wanted to be accurate, it would be Shin Ryusei Tensei, which would roughly translate as True Reincarnation of the Meteor. If the Shin Meteor Tensei title wasn't obvious enough, I will still take a moment to confirm that the game's page says that it's a first-person dungeon crawler inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. Now, the reason why I definitely want to hammer home that this is a game jam game is because it was probably made in a very short amount of time, and as such, may seem incredibly basic and simplistic in places. Your character wakes up in a mysterious military research lab that's overrun by demons, and your one objective is to try and prevent a meteor from presumably wiping out all life on Earth. Very quickly into your quest, you'll pick up a Pomp, which is an obvious allusion to MegaTen's comps, and it only sounds absolutely ridiculous if you let yourself forget that Megami Tensei canonically has things called Gumps. It also comes with a Jamon summoning program, which I think is some kind of salty Spanish ham, or I don't know, maybe the monsters in this game are just called Hamons. The official game page does call them demons though, but I don't know, this dude looks like he might be made out of dry cured ham, what do you think? I actually really like the setting here, with the creepy military base giving me a lot of the 80s sci-fi horror vibes that I loved about Strange Journey. The one lone objective is simple enough to understand and works for what is supposed to be a short experience. As previously stated, you crawl through the dungeon, first-person style, and it even utilizes the SMT moon phases as you explore. Though if these phases actually affect anything, I couldn't tell you what. In battle, you have a sword and a gun, a magic option, the ability to talk to enemies, and a basic escape. You can find better weapons and armor by actually exploring each floor of the lab more thoroughly, and your character will just put everything on automatically, making it less equipment and more just general stat boosts. For example, armor doesn't really boost your defense, it just gives you more HP. While there are only a small handful of enemy types in the game, most of them will have at least one resistance and one weakness. For example, the Salty Ham Demon takes additional damage from gun attacks, and after a few gun upgrades, you'll knock him down with a single hit. But that brings us to the magic and talk options. Basically, you don't have any magic, much like the original SMT1 protagonist, so here's what you're gonna need to do. Recruit Carry Crutches over here as soon as possible. As far as I can tell, talking is just a flip of the coin whether it succeeds or fails, so you may need to try a few times before she joins you. Once you have her, using the magic option has her cast a simple healing spell on you, and trust me, you're gonna want this, as the only other way to restore your health is a single blue cube that you can find on each floor. After that, simply try to recruit one of whatever new Jamons you come across, as each floor usually introduces at least one new enemy type. Aside from the ham beast, you've also got a sock puppet, this superb owl, a straight-up Persona reference, and even Saki from Brazilian folklore, who was also in Exodus Checkmate. And remember to put that one Doofenshmirtz meme in here, John, and... wait. You'll notice that the more demons you recruit, the more damage your magic does, while your tiny Timantha, who did not die, will give you a small taste of healing each time. And then you just... win. You don't have MP, so there's nothing stopping you from spamming this, and the little girl is basically the only monster who resists magic damage. You can take down some of the other monsters a little faster by hitting their weaknesses, but you'll always want to regularly use magic to try and keep your HP replenished as you explore the later floors. I even beat the final boss by just spamming magic and keeping my health up. The entire game is only about 40 minutes long, and it's free to download, so I can't really give any reasons not to play it if it looks like something you'd like to check out. It's a bit simple and repetitive in places, but never to the point where it becomes unbearable, because, again, you're gonna get the full experience in less than an hour. I do wish the game had some music in it, or at least some better ambient sounds to try and sell the atmosphere, which, as a reminder, I do really like and am praising. I'll also admit that I really don't like how the map works in this game, as you'll constantly press the button to get a top-down view of only the general area around you, that also bases itself on the direction you're facing rather than a consistent bird's-eye view. A mini-map that updates in real time or a proper full map would have worked out a lot better. I don't know if the creators are watching this or if they had any plans to eventually expand the idea, but I'd be down for seeing it more fleshed out. I like the vibes it has, it feels very MegaTen-esque while still having its own sense of personal identity, the sprite work is pretty good, and yeah, I'd be down for seeing more. Add a little bit more narrative, fine-tune the combat, hire a composer, and give us a minimap, and I'd truly be down for this Meteor Reincarnation as a few hours long paid experience. Our next game is already a bit of a misnomer, because that implies that I'm only discussing a single game. Elohim Eternal from George Alexandros is the definition of an expansive universe. So let me start out with Elohim Eternal Prologue. Much like true Meteor Reincarnation, this is a relatively short free-to-play story. It came out on Steam in summer of 2022 and was our gaming introduction to this franchise. Prologue gives us a chance to meet our protagonist, Joshua, learn a bit about this world that combines ancient religions with science fiction, and get a taste for the combat, which is pretty darn good. I will touch more on this in a bit. Normally, when I discuss these Megami Tensei-inspired indies, I have to look to outside sources, but Prologue actually offers some behind-the-scenes information, with an in-game document stating, the Shin Megami Tensei series influenced Elohim Eternal's combat system, which relies heavily on taking advantage of enemy weaknesses. Other inspirations claimed are the Horizon Zero Dawn series and Xenogears, which I still have not played, sorry Bao. Joshua is a soldier on a trek to Mount Sinai when he meets a judge named Tovit, who lost so much, and this man teaches Joshua to let go of his anger at his father's death at the hands of the Cainites, asking him to focus on just loving those we've lost, rather than dedicating our lives to revenge. Tovit's story is a short one, but the prologue chapter makes us care about him, and does a good job introducing us to Joshua in a short amount of time. The prologue ends with Joshua meeting up with his uncle, Lamech, before the two reach Mount Sinai in the morning, which is where the game that this is a prologue to, Elohim Eternal: The Babel Code, begins. Now, one of the main things about this title that I could see turning some people off is that it throws a lot of terminology your way, and I'm secure enough to admit that some of it definitely went over my head, so sorry if some of this is a little wrong. Basically, my understanding is you have the Idanites and the Cainites. The Idanites are split into two groups, Jehudans and Atticans, who hate each other, but share a mutual contempt for the Cainites, who are these mostly mechanical cyborg humans who worship Ahix, a supposed world eater who stands in opposition of the Cosmocrators whom the Idanites worship. There are also the Shadim, which act as most of the enemies in this game, and are generally portrayed as beasts with some mechanical parts. There's a lot of religious-based lore that mostly comes from Judeo-Christian stories, but it also mixes in some Babylonian, Sumerian, and ancient Egyptian. The Babel Code does something that I do generally like seeing in RPGs, where each of the main party members comes from a different faction, and they all have their own perspectives on things, working together mostly out of necessity rather than a genuine interest in camaraderie. I already mentioned Joshua, who is a Jehudan soldier who wants to be a judge, but lost an arm early in the game after being ambushed by Canaanites at Mount Sinai. There's also Beoz, a judge for the Atticans, who was actually treated as an outcast because his mother was a Jehudan, and Ruthia, a half-Canaanite, half-alien who supposedly comes from the planet that the Idanites perceive as heaven. None of these characters start on the best of terms with one another, and I actually really liked seeing them grow closer and challenge their own belief systems throughout the course of the game. Despite Tovit's teachings, Joshua still has a lot to learn about letting go of his anger and mistrust. Honestly, the three party members are one of the best parts of this game, and I liked seeing them all change and develop as characters over the course of the story. The Elohim Eternal series actively wants and encourages you to interact with its world. As you explore, you'll find shrines, books, plaques, and other things to read, which often help explain some of the lore or terminology that you've been exposed to. One of my personal favorite things is that every area in the game has some of these little sparkles. Some are on the main path, while others require a bit of exploration, but collecting all of them in a zone results in you finding an artifact from that area that just gives you a little bit of history. I liked this. They also have these things called heart events that are... I don't really want to say they're like social events, they're more like... Remember those moments in Persona Q where you reach a dead end so the group decides to just chat for a bit? It's kinda more like that. Just fun little optional character moments where your party interacts with each other, and I personally really enjoyed these. Very few NPCs in this game just do the "Welcome to Corneria" thing, and nearly everybody you talk to has a lot to say, often leading to a back and forth conversation between the characters. While all of this may just sound like pointless fluff, you're almost always rewarded for interacting with it through items, money, or experience points, making it a worthwhile part of the game. Your mileage may vary on whether the amount of dialogue in this title is a good thing or a bad thing, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few moments where I found myself going, I get it, and hitting that A button a little more vigorously, but even I can respect and appreciate the level of detail and world building that went into the game, and attempting to make everyone you can interact with feel like something of an actual person rather than just a game character. While the plot generally takes itself pretty seriously, there are certainly a few moments where they slip in some humor, and it usually feels very organic and got me to crack a smile quite a few times. One of my favorite examples is when Joshua and Beoz have to explore the city and ask around about a bizarre prophet. And while they're comparing leads and hunting down information to try and find him, they basically have a, "Oh wait, isn't that him?" moment, and I liked that. The Babel Code presents players with an item called Story Mode that basically allows you to turn off the combat and experience the game purely as a narrative experience, but you may want to hold off on doing that because the combat is pretty awesome. Rather than attacking purely with weaponry, the gang all uses different elemental attacks that should all sound pretty familiar. Fire, ice, wind, electricity, earth, light, and dark. Each character can only naturally use a few of these, but you can craft Crystallos to use as accessories to increase every character's spell options. Most enemies have some weaknesses that you can either guess through trial and error or use a specific item to scan them. Whenever you exploit an enemy weakness, which you should do all the time whenever possible, because anything besides what they're weak against is on par with shooting spitballs at them, you have a chance to deal extra damage by getting a well-timed hit on this circle thingy. I'm actually not sure what to call this. Each character has different functions and stats, like Joshua can tank a lot of hits, but has the weakest magic, while Ruthia is a total glass cannon, who will be your main damage dealer, but also dies really easily. Aside from your basic elemental attacks, characters can also equip divinity spells that range from super powerful attacks, buffs, healing abilities, status ailments, and more. One mechanic I'll admit I really don't like is some enemies have this shield thing called an Aspida, which can only be broken by using a specific divinity spell. It just kinda serves to waste your time. It'd be fine for boss fights, but there are just encounters that have these. And speaking of that, I do have one minor complaint, and that's that I really wish this was one of those games that just fully healed you after each battle, because hear me out, there's not really any good reason for it not to. See, each dungeon has these tree things that fully heal you for free whenever you interact with them. And because there are no random encounters in this game, and enemies stay dead unless you specifically use those trees to request for them to respawn, you can just run back to the tree and heal after every fight instead of using your items, which is, at worst, a little tedious, and a step that the game could easily remove by just healing you at the end of combat. The world of Elohim Eternal asks for a fair amount of commitment from its players, but it also knows how to reward them for taking the time to engage with it. The story really explores the idea of faith and how our beliefs shape who we become, and how exploring new ideas can lead to better outcomes. Emphasis on can, because without spoiling too much, there are definitely parts of the story that are, to put it lightly, a bit of a downer. But I absolutely loved the Babel code and look forward to the next game. George has actually promised a lot more in this universe, so I may even revisit it one day on the show. I may even revisit it right now because BAM! Elohim Eternal Exodus! Much like Prologue, this is a free-to-play story that takes place prior to the events of the Babel Code. Unlike Prologue, it's a totally new cast of characters, setting, and time period, taking place 1,000 years before the Babel Code with a much heavier emphasis on Egyptian folklore, settings, and characters. Instead of Joshua, we play as Mosh, the prince of the Misru who has Simru blood, who were basically the Idanites and Canaanites before the Idanites and Canaanites. After defying the Pharaoh's orders to execute some Simru slaves and abandoning his hot pregnant wife, Mosh, along with this edgelord demon guy and Zipporah, team up with the Archons, aka Egyptian gods, to try and topple the Demiurge, or false gods, hold over their land. Some of the stuff you see may be familiar if you've watched The Prince of Egypt, like the whole plagues and let my people go and stuff. Or, if you're just familiar with that story beyond the 1998 animated cinematic masterpiece. As is understandable from a free-to-play game, Exodus is a lot more straightforward and simplified than Babel Code. The story is mostly presented in this visual novel style with portraits rather than sprites, and there are no more towns or dungeons, instead relegating things to these separated maps where you can specifically walk over to chests, enemies, or NPCs. Now, full disclosure, Exodus isn't actually out yet, but it's expected to get a full release in early 2025. In fact, last I checked, it should be out sometime in January. When George heard I was talking about Elohim Eternal for this video, he sent me a code for this latest title, and I'm happy to include it in my thoughts for this series. I honestly love the Egyptian setting, it's something I think MegaTen usually drops the ball on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it. Battles are also a bit more simplified in Exodus, with Mosh primarily using physical skills, Haran using all the magic elementals, and Zippity-Doo-Dah covering healing and support. You can still scan for enemy weaknesses, but I was a bit surprised that Exodus removes the combo system from Babel Code and Prologue, which makes Haran feel slightly less useful. Seeing as how Exodus is going to be a free-to-play experience, and it's still a good 5 to 6 hours, I see no reason not to wishlist it and check it out once it comes out, and Prologue is a great way to gauge your interest in the Babel Code. And you'd think I'd be done, but I should probably mention that aside from these 3 titles, there's a book, and if that isn't the most MegaTen-inspired thing I've ever heard, I'm not sure what is. Elohim Eternal, Battle at the Mount, further expands upon the Babel Code by going into the events of the fight at Mount Sinai years before the events of the main game. We see some familiar faces and meet a few new ones, with it mostly focusing on Beoz's mother, Rahab. Obviously, you don't need to read this roughly 80-page adventure to understand the game, but it does add a lot more lore to the franchise, and at this point, I think if you're invested in the Elohim Eternal world, you may as well soak up as much lore as you can. The book is also free to download, so yeah, check it out if you're interested. And if a video game, a prologue chapter, a novella, and a free-to-play upcoming side game wasn't enough, George has also already announced Elohim Eternal 2, Son of Man, and a free-to-play side game to that one currently dubbed Elohim Eternal 2.5. These ones have mechs in them. I'm not sure when those are coming out, but if you're interested, there's plenty else to play and look forward to in the meantime. George has said that his idea for this franchise is 6 main games, each with a free-to-play side game, So yeah, there's a lot on the horizon for this ambitious series. Let me know if you want me to eventually cover Son of Man in one of these videos when that eventually comes out, but for now, I think I am Elohim Eternal'd out. There was definitely a lot to get through here, but I had fun with it. Okay, so this next one might require a bit of explaining. I found a game on itch.io called Sacrament IV from the developer Me3. The page for this game describes it as a post-disaster occult horror RPG/text adventure inspired by the likes of Shin Megami Tensei, Evangelion, and pre-tribulation premillennialism.
I know some of these words.
However, I'm not here to just talk about Sacrament IV because, much like Elohim Eternal Prologue, this is only one small part of something bigger. In this case, a title from 2018 called Lucah, Born of a Dream. You see, Sacrament IV, as the name suggests, is the fourth sacrament, all of which are stories or events found within Born of a Dream itself. So, despite Sacrament IV being released as a standalone title, it's just a small part of Lucah, so I'm going to talk about that first, but I'll come back to 4 in a bit. You play as this person. Am I Lucah? Maybe I am. I got to name myself. I called myself Lucah. They do the Pokemon all caps thing, where it sounds like everybody just says Lucah really loud. You wake up on a beach in this forest and have virtually nothing to go on besides being a cyan squiggly. After learning how to beat up dangerous red scribbles, you continue on your journey. If I had far less respect for all of you and myself, I'd call Lucah Born of a Dream the Dark Souls of Megami Tensei inspired indie games. You have light attacks, heavy attacks, and dodges that eat up stamina, so dodging and parrying are both important to stay alive while your stamina refills. I was originally a little worried about playing this game, to be honest, because I am generally not good at spectacle fighters, particularly those of a debatably Dark Soulsian variety. Like, look, I died to the very first boss. Oh no, wait, that was supposed to happen. I guess maybe I don't suck that much after all. Oh, no, I do. I'm pretty sure I was only able to beat this pair of purple scratchies called the Hive because I accidentally freed Michael during the fight and he decided to help out. That was clearly a team effort. Fortunately, Me3 accounted for people like myself who suffer from the debilitating effects of being terrible, and this game actually has some of the most versatile difficulty customization options I've ever seen in a game like this. Not only are there 2 separate difficulty settings, one that affects you and one for enemies, you can also speed up or slow down the entire game. And there are even in-game cheat codes that offer things like super increased HP, making enemies suck even more, infinite stamina, infinite charge, and so forth. In an attempt to keep some dignity, I only turned on the make enemies suck code. Basically, if you're someone who's nervous about more action-oriented games, or whether you want more of a challenge, Born of a Dream actually gives you a lot of control as to how difficult your experience will be. There are plenty of different combat styles and these things called virtues that you can use for passive bonuses, sort of like Paper Mario's badge system. So the combat also feels really fun, frantic, and engaging, but above all, rewarding. Even if you do need to make it a bit easier to feel good about yourself, that's perfectly fine. You also get familiars that can help you out in battle with a variety of effects, and thanks to a helpful merchant, you can visit a garden where you can pet them. Well, this is the best game ever. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to collect all the familiars because one of them requires you to beat this arcade game that I suck at. As you can see for yourself, the game is a visual treat, with the scribble-like designs and textures adding a lot to the world. When I first saw footage for this game, I was actually a little afraid that it'd be hard to keep track of things. But aside from struggling with parries because I have the reflexes of Spanish salted ham, and by the time I realized which side was my enemy's face, I'd already been smacked across the room, I found it pretty easy to know what I could or couldn't interact with because of the fantastic use of color. As the name suggests, Born of a Dream often feels like you're in a dream, with weird logic and how you move from one place to another. You just kinda wander from place to place, and there's very little actual direction. From that forest, you wind up in a church where these worshippers are all flagellating themselves, but you also wind up on subway cars, a gladiatorial arena run by a corrupt leader, and I already mentioned the arcade. The story of Born of a Dream is minimal, almost too minimal actually. In fact, the real story arguably doesn't even start until after you beat it for the first time and start seeing different things in New Game Plus. There are a few recurring characters, and you eventually learn a lot more about who you might be, but no matter how much you see or unlock, the game still leaves a bit too much up to interpretation for my liking. But I'll admit that the lack of concrete answers does kinda lend itself to the dreamlike nature. Lucah Born of a Dream is a game that I booted up and prepared to record a bit of footage for this video. By the time I was like, okay, that's probably good, it'd been over 2 hours and I was over halfway through the game, so I definitely found myself engrossed by a lot of what this title had to offer. In fact, it's in New Game Plus that you can start seeing those sacraments I mentioned earlier, of which there are 6. But since Sacrament 4 is the one that specifically said it was inspired by SMT, I'm just gonna focus on that one. And look, I love Sacrament 4. The game is a sort of text-adventure RPG hybrid. You play as 3 soldiers, K201, C89, and AA77, as they explore Ground Zero of a bizarre cataclysmic event where every building and life for miles was mysteriously wiped out, save for a single school. While most of the game is told through text, there are moments where you explore the school through a menu adventure game style system, and as these 3 agents come face to face with nightmares, it even delves into turn-based combat, and these segments were fantastic. Unlike most RPGs, you can't just attack, occasionally heal, attack. You have to use these different commands wisely, pay attention to what the game says the enemy is doing, lure them toward a specific character, lay down suppressing fire, and look for the right openings to deliver a successful attack. Like, look, absolutely no hate to Born of a Dream, but this world, this setting, these characters, this gameplay, oh, I'd have loved so much more of this. Like a few other things I've talked about today, this is a shorter experience, and one that is available separately if you just wanted to play it without needing to beat Born of a Dream, and get a decent way into New Game Plus, and actually manage to find where Sacrament 4 is hidden, but I want to be clear, I think that's well worth it too. Because it's so short, I don't want to say much about Sacrament 4 and risk spoiling it. So I guess that's it, and we can move on to, oh wait, did I mention Death of a Wish? No? Well, I'm gonna. This game only came out earlier in 2024, and it's a much newer experience. You play as Christian, a character and recurring boss fight from Born of a Dream. But does that make this game a sequel? An alternate universe? Just one of the many possible branches in the twisted, gnarled tree that is this dream world? Well, yes? I actually got to talk with the dev on this one, and Colin told me that Death of a Wish was originally conceived to be a sequel to Born of a Dream, but they wanted it to be accessible to those that never played the original game. So on the team, they started referring to it more as a successor rather than a proper sequel. Colin also provided me with a code for this game when I told him about this video series, so I'm very thankful for that. That was super cool of them. Mechanically, Death of a Wish is very similar to Born of a Dream, so I'm not going to go over everything again, but there is definitely a lot more to the narrative this time. There's more dialogue, expressive portraits, and the characters feel more in tune with what's going on. It's got a generally darker, more pessimistic vibe that, while I enjoyed, can definitely start to feel a little heavy. While you can just jump straight into Death of a Wish, I'd probably still recommend starting with Born of a Dream as an introduction to this world and its mechanics if it looks like something you're curious about. It's a matter of personal preference, but I'd personally prefer it if you were willing to give both games a shot. Also, Me Less Than 3, if you're watching, seriously, full-blown Sacrament 4 style RPG. Like get on that. I'll help. Let's make that happen. A while back, there was an image going around Twitter that said, "The last TV show you watched is now getting a crossover with the last video game played." And sure, I played along. At the time, I was rewatching Gravity Falls and playing Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, respectively. But after having a nice chuckle and making my tweet, I realized, actually, yeah, a Megami Tensei-like RPG set in a Gravity Falls-like town would be absolutely amazing. Anyway, Bloomtown, A Different Story, is absolutely amazing. Despite the surface-level Persona comparisons, I still decided to just go ahead and ask, so I reached out to the folks who run the official Bloomtown Twitter to check if there was any specific MegaTen inspirations, and they told me, yes, Persona has definitely been a strong inspiration. It is a game we absolutely love and respect. So, there you go. The publisher for the game, Twin Sails Interactive, actually sent me a Steam code for the title, and in that email they said, Bloomtown is a narrative JRPG mixing turn-based combat and social RPG features, inspired by classic JRPGs like Chrono Trigger and Earthbound, but also modern ones like Persona and Sea of Stars. Now, despite getting a Steam key, all the footage you're seeing here is from the Switch version, because I was still excited enough for this game to buy it. You play as Emily, a young girl who is arriving in Bloomtown for the summer with her brother Chester. They'll be staying with their grandpa, who I'm going to humorously call Grunkle Sojiro in the hopes that at least one of you will laugh. And on the surface, Bloomtown has a lot of modern, cozy game vibes, albeit shown from the perspective of a little kid visiting a small town. You can plant crops in the backyard garden, help your grandpa's friend at the grocery store to earn some pocket pennies, go fishing, cook food items like delicious black licorice wheels, hang out with your friends, get swole as heck, explore the twisted versions of Bloomtown locations to fight monsters in a realm known only as the Underside and defeat them with the power of your not personas, and read books. The world is your oyster when you're a kid on summer vacation. Before long, Emily is contacted by, just straight up Lucifer, and told that she'll need to take down 3 pesky demons in the Underside. While the game's narrative tries to paint a sense of urgency to this task, it doesn't actually line up with the gameplay, and thankfully, summer lasts for as long as you want in the world of Bloomtown. While they could have easily put Persona-style deadlines on these chapters, I'm really glad they didn't, because I think that would weaken the cozy aspects of this nightmare-filled creepy town game. There's a narrative rush, but one that the game forgoes to remain chill. Kinda like how Tom Nook will never actually send the raccoon goons after you. Joining Emily on her quest is her brother Chester, a local tomboy named Ramona, and an immortal talking corgi named Hugo, who gets jacked when you're in the Underside. Lucifer helps these children take on demons by awakening their inner guardians, which, come on, they're totally personas, and I am okay with that. Emily gets a rather dapper-looking furry, Ramona has a creepy puppet lady, Chester gets a cyborg T-Rex, and Hugo gets an ancient Aztec warrior. After defeating the first demon, the gang also adds a 5th member, a handy-dandy fix-it girl named Ruth, who kinda takes on the Fuka Rise Futaba role, but she doesn't get her own guardian, she just gets, walkie-talkies. Something that I actually really like about Bloomtown is that taking down the 3 demons are all treated as different mysteries for our group of kids and their talking dog to solve. The first case, for example, involves searching for a missing child, but the second one is actually a murder mystery where you have to not only find the culprit, but help the ghost of a victim in the Underside figure out who they even were in life. The game does a truly good job at blending a sense of seedy realness to the more occult-based settings, and there are times when it's genuinely unsettling, especially given the young age of the protagonists. Unlike a Persona game, your days aren't limited by specific time periods, but time passes as you explore the town and do stuff more like a traditional life sim. So for example, if you get started on it early enough, you can actually spend time with multiple friends and witness their social link style stories in a single day. And I found myself really liking most of these stories. The blossoming friendship between Emily and Ramona is genuinely heartwarming. Seeing Chester try to be more independent by falling in with the wrong crowd makes you want to protect him, but that very act may push him further away. And learning more about Hugo's tragic history and his previous owners were all really enjoyable. My only real complaint is that there just aren't that many of these stories. Emily only has these social link style events with her party members, including Ruth, and each character only gets a small handful of them. These being the only place the characters have any sort of growth as characters, since they don't really change or grow throughout the main plot. Other characters may have side quests and stuff, but I'd have liked more social opportunities to get to know the residents of Bloomtown and make it feel a lot more inhabited. However, your party members do gain some incredible passive abilities for doing these quests, so trust me, it's always worth the effort rather than just plowing through the combat stuff. Of course, you can also choose to spend your time by going into the Underside, but here's a helpful tip. Whether you enter that alternate world at 10 AM or 9 PM, you're coming out of it at 9:30 at night. So it's always a good idea to make the most of your day before you blow the whistle to enter that crazy hell dimension to go fight demons. Speaking of the combat, it's Persona 5. Every character has melee attacks and ranged attacks, the latter of which refill their ammo at the end of each fight. You can knock enemies down by exploiting their elemental weaknesses, and from there you can either try to recruit them or initiate an all-out attack. Buffs and debuffs last 3 turns a pop, and you can inflict status ailments on enemies to make them more susceptible to other types of damage. Bloomtown does add a few semi-distinct ideas that work for me, like a positioning system where you can't attack demons with melee weapons if another demon is in front of them. But some just feel like they're trying to be different for different sake, and I don't necessarily like it. Like deciding that Persona's one more system for exploiting weaknesses should only reward you an extra turn sometimes. You know, as a treat. Aside from their main guardian, each character can recruit one demon, to grant them access to additional spells, so there's a nice level of party customization there. Thanks to Lucifer's help, you can fuse demons together to strengthen your existing ones, so even early game demons can remain viable if there's a specific skill set that you like using. I do admittedly have one small complaint with the battle system though. See, every single round in Bloomtown follows the same turn order. Emily, Ramona, Chester, Hugo, and then the demons. Once you understand this, it basically just becomes a call for dominant strategy to have the early moving characters focus on buffs, debuffs, healing, and status ailments in order to maximize Hugo's damage at the end of the round. I know I control the buttons I push and I don't have to use that strategy, but the game is just really optimized toward it. And even if that's not exactly what you're doing every turn, the battles can get kinda repetitive. However, look, I want to be clear, despite any critiques I may have, I absolutely adored this game, and it scratched an itch that I've had for a particularly long time now. The pixel art and music are absolutely phenomenal, and I found myself humming some of the tunes while I was working on stuff. This was an absolutely fantastic game, and one that I was really happy to talk about on the show. If you're a fan of this channel and you know how I do things, you can probably guess I'm going to talk about this game again very, very soon. I can't wait to see what the devs have planned for the future, and am eagerly awaiting their next title. Alright, and there we go. 5 more indie games inspired by Megami Tensei, except it actually ended up being more like, 9? 12 if we're counting Crowned King and the Elohim Eternal 2 duology? Oh yeah, and a book? But who's counting? I am. Okay, new rule. Only one of these games that are actually multiple games per video, because this admittedly ended up being a lot. But I had fun with it, and I hope you all did as well. Maybe I even convinced you to pick up one or more of these titles. As always, I've included links to every game I've talked about today in the description, so feel free to check them out, show the developers a little love, and help me keep this series going with a little engagement. If you know of any MegaTen inspired indies that I should look into, let me know, and if you're a developer working on one, I definitely want to hear about that. I am always looking for new titles to add to my magic spreadsheet. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time, but until then, take care.